Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. Over the last few decades, the historical view that animals are inferior to human beings has increasingly been challenged in the West. People are becoming more aware of the way in which we use and abuse animals. Some animal rights advocates hold that the poor treatment of animals has its roots in religious ideas and practices. Is this true? Is Islam and other religions human-centered? We will speak with Dr. Sarra Tlili. She's an assistant professor in Arabic language and literature at the University of Florida. She's also the author of Animals in the Quran, a book that presents animals as moral, spiritual, intelligent, and accountable beings. Sarra, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Now, some people look at religion and say, well, religion is responsible for the negative way in which we perceive animals. What are your thoughts on that, especially with relation to the Quran, which you're most familiar with?
Yes. Well, I mean, religion has always been used to justify a number of bad practices and negative attitudes. However, I believe that the Quran and probably other scriptures, including the Bible, lend themselves to a different reading in which animals in fact are quite valued. The Quran, for example, says there is no animal on earth nor a bird flying with two birds save that they are nations like you. It also presents animals as spiritual beings. They worship God, they are Muslim, they are obedient to God, and the Quran clearly it ascribes to them as well morality. It seems also to ascribe to them even rationality and language. So they are presented as very complex beings that worship God, that are clearly valued. So I guess all of this shows that like the Quran, it can be used also or it shows that the Quran has in fact a very good or positive depiction of non-human animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why do you think understandings of the way the Quran has looked at animals has changed over time?
Well, maybe it hasn't changed that much. It has changed, but not that much. Like human-centered readings of the Quran have always been there, and I guess it is just like part of the nature. We are human beings and we want to see ourselves as God's favorites. So when we read the Quran or any other scripture, we tend to look for what values us more. So it is a problem perhaps of reading more than anything else. But if we want to read the Quran differently, like this is in fact similar to the way the Quran was read as something that values males more than females. But now that we have a number of feminists and women working on the Quran, it is showing clearly that the scripture presents women and men are equal beings, So the same with animals. If we want to listen carefully to what the Quran is saying, we find a very egalitarian message. I think this is at least what I personally have, the conclusion that I have reached from my own work.
Now, what about some people who say, well, the Quran is addressed to human beings, so
yes.
How can you say that, it cares about animals so much if it doesn't even, speak to them?
Right. Well, I mean, the Quran does say about itself that it is a message to humankind. So this is how it is a message to start with humankind, but while it is a message to humankind, one of the things that it seeks to teach them about is how to value God's creation. Now, why humankind specifically are receiving a message, well, we don't know in fact about other creatures.
Maybe they're receiving their own message?
We don't know. I mean, some people have, proposed this idea, but regardless, it's. Some people also say perhaps that because we are the most problematic species, we are the species that can cause a lot of damage. There is a verse in the Quran which says that bees receive inspiration, and because of this, this is not part of the mainstream Islamic tradition, but a number of scholars say that at least bees have received inspiration from God. And in any case, the idea that animals in the Quran have their own relationship to God, which is not part of the human experience, I think it can be detected from a number of Quranic themes.
Can you tell us more about this relationship that animals have to God?
Yes. Well, for example, it's not perhaps unique to animals, but the Quran says, for example, that there is no creature save that it it sings the glory of God. يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّهِ. So this shows, however, the Quran says also, however, you do not understand the way they glorify God. So this shows that there is something that is between God and other creatures which is not part of the human experience. It's not, and the Quran also tells humans that you have been given of knowledge only a tiny bit. So like the fact that the Quran emphasizes that we know very little about other things, it implies that there is a lot in the way other creatures interact with God or relate to God that is not part of our mental experience or like everyday experience.
Will animals be resurrected alongside human beings?
Well, there are two verses in the Quran which say that which can at least or lead to this conclusion. One in Surah number 6, it says that all animals will be gathered to God. So most Quranic scholars have understood this or interpret this as an indication that animals will be resurrected and will be held accountable for the things that they do among themselves. There is also a prophetic tradition which says that every creature is going to be resurrected and will be held accountable.
So this means that animals do have their own sense of morality then?
Yes.
They're judged on?
Yes, and in fact this is something that we see in Surah number 27. In this Surah, Prophet Solomon interacts with a bird, and the bird gives a report to Prophet Solomon. After that, Prophet Solomon says, we will see whether you have said the truth or if you are one of the liars. So this shows that, like, the bird at least is capable of lying. I mean, whether this will count as a moral failure for the bird or not, it's a different question, but at least from our own standpoint, we consider lying as something immoral. So and of course, like there are other things in which animals are presented as quite moral, at least, like we see that they are God's soldiers, like they go, for example, to punish the Pharaoh for disobeying God. So it
the
seems,
elephant and the birds.
And the elephant and the birds,
Yeah.
yes, plenty of themes. You find this also in the prophetic tradition. The prophet referred to his she-camel clearly as a moral being, like at some point when they were going to sign the a peace treaty with the Meccans, his she-camel stopped moving, and his companions were saying, oh, she has become stubborn. I said, no, this is not like her moral character. She's too good to do this thing. She's just receiving an order from God to stop at this place. So there is plenty, I think, there are plenty of themes which lead to these conclusions. Again, I mean, these are interpretations, true, but I believe they are plausible interpretations.
How do you respond to someone who says, well, we're allowed to use animals instrumentally? We're allowed to consume their flesh, for example.
Yeah.
We're allowed to use them to do certain activities, for example, plowing a field or something like this.
Yes. So the Quran, in fact, is very clear that certain uses of animals are permissible, including killing them for food and using them for transportation. The Prophet himself did kill certain animals for food and use them for transportation. However, with the killing part, like human beings are not the only species that live on flesh or consume flesh, right? So this is something
animals
that
also consume flesh.
Yes, and this does not make them any less Muslim.
Yes.
In any case, from an environmental standpoint, it is perhaps necessary to have this, like I think the entire nature kind of feeds on one another. This doesn't mean that, in fact, humans are at the top of the food chain. There is no top of the food chain. It's like a circle. We are all part of it. We can ourselves be consumed by animals, like it's like if we end up in the wrong place, we can be the food for a beast of prey or something. So, and this doesn't make animals from an Islamic standpoint, I believe, any less moral, or like it's not a fault that is, that they live on flesh. About the use of other uses of animals, the Quran permits this, but the prophetic tradition is very keen on highlighting the limitations that are applied to these uses, including killing for food. So like when you kill for food, you are supposed to do it in a way that inflicts the least physical and psychological pain possible. You have also to mention the name of God when you do this, because it's not something that should be taken for granted. You are taking a life depriving a creature of its life so that you can live yourself. I believe all of these restrictions show that animals, even though we need them, and it's a mercy of God that we can use them, because especially in pre-modern times, we had to depend on animals, for transportation, for a number of things. So the Quran presents these permissions as a grace from God, but they come with a number of responsibilities, and they come also with a number of limitations. So, for example, you're not allowed to overwork animals or overload them or underfeed them. You have to attend to their needs, you're not allowed to mutilate them. Anything that will make them feel pain is in fact quite disallowed and is presented as punishable.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about how other religions view animals and other world traditions as well.
Yes, well, I believe the prevalent idea is that
in your book you talked about the Abrahamic religions, and
yes.
you also talked about religions in the Indian subcontinent.
Yes.
So maybe you can talk about both of those.
Yes, well, because the Abrahamic traditions allow their members to kill animals for food, whereas Indian traditions generally promote vegetarianism, and there is this notion of ahimsa, they oppose violence to all living creatures. So there is the idea that Abrahamic traditions are more anthropocentric than Indian traditions. And in a way, yes, of course, when you look at this, it is a plausible opinion, obviously. However, on the other hand, what we see is that Abrahamic traditions present non-human animals as spiritual beings. They worship God. Like the idea that animals worship God is not unique to Islam. It is common, in fact, to the three Abrahamic traditions, Christianity and Judaism included. When you look at the Indian and other world traditions, including, for example, Confucianism, you see that there is a hierarchy and animals are placed under the human being. In fact, in the notion of reincarnation, the notion of reincarnation itself has a positive connotation to it, because it shows that there is continuity between humans and other animals, but in this continuity, humans are above animals, and the only reason is because they belong to the human species. Like being reincarnated as an animal is a punishment. So being an animal in these traditions is a moral failure, and being a human being is already a moral achievement. So there is also this negative dimension that you see in Indian traditions toward animals. They are not really valued, although they do assign them spirituality, but they are not valued for who they are. Their lives are believed to be like full of misery because they're perceived as warring with one another all the time, which is not, always the case. It's just like how we tend to perceive them, I guess.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to a Muslim who's thinking about animals and how he or she should treat them? How should they go back to the Quranic tradition? What's your advice to them?
Yes, well, I believe the answer is quite simple. We just need to be more informed. I think the tradition has plenty to say about how to treat animals, which is not part of our consciousness anymore. This is for a number of reasons. Part of it is like we are not trained in, like we're not given a religious training anymore. We go to secular schools, so we're not even exposed to all these teachings. The teachings are plenty. They tell us, they give very specific and very detailed instructions of how to deal with animals. So for example, the way we eat our meat, clearly like eating meat is permissible in Islam, but you have to observe so many restrictions that the way you kill the animal, you should sharpen the blade, you should not sharpen the blade in front of the animal, you should not kill one animal in front of the other, like so many so many restrictions that are quite important. You should never overload an animal, anything that has mutilation. So I believe all of this shows that, just inform ourselves, go back to tradition and learn about it.
Sarra, thank you so much for joining us and Let the Quran Speak. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll take a break. On our return, we will be reviewing the movie Heaven is for Real.